Hey folks, this is Mr. Andrew Crocker as always, and this time around we are actually taking a quick rest stop from our normal programming, which is where we go chapter by chapter by chapter through the textbook. We got a little pit stop here because every political science and social studies class that is either high school or above in the state of Missouri has to cover the Missouri Constitution. And the Missouri Constitution is not easy to shoehorn into a course already built about the United States government because the Missouri government only marginally relates to the United States government, as we've learned in our chapter on federalism. And in addition to that, the Missouri Constitution, I don't know if you ever had a chance to look through the Missouri Constitution, but it's really long. It's way over 100 pages, whereas the United States Constitution is only a few pages. So instead of me assigning it to you or putting you on some scavenger hunt thing that you'll never learn from, what I'm going to do is lecture on it for a little while, and you are welcome to take notes on it, and then you'll go ahead and take a quiz on this particular lecture. So your ability to succeed on this lecture, ability to succeed on the Missouri Constitution quiz is directly tied to how closely you are plugged in over the next however long of this particular lecture. So let's learn a little bit about the Missouri Constitution. Now, as far as the Missouri Constitution is concerned, it actually has been written several times. There have been several Missouri Constitutions, not just the one that we are using right now. Now, the first one was written in 1820, but then we've had several constitutional conventions called to review and, completely replace the Missouri Constitution. Now, the most meaningful one was right there in the middle of the Civil War. Missouri was really strange in the middle of the Civil War. We were neither a pure North or pure South state. Instead, we kind of fought on both sides of the Civil War. And we called a constitutional convention to figure out whether we wanted to join the seceding states or not. It took us 3 years as a state to figure out that we wanted to reject secession and stay with the United States of America. So just the fact that it took it 3 years should tell. It took that conversation. Let me say that again. That conversation took 3 years should be an indication to you right now that Missouri was really conflicted on how exactly the state felt on seceding. There were two other attempts shortly after shortly after the Civil War, but the Missouri Constitution that we currently have was written in 1945. So that's the one that we're currently using. That's way over 100 pages, really long and complex. For the record, there's a part of the Missouri Constitution that's pretty clever, and it says that every 20 years, starting in 1962, every 20 years, Missourians are asked to vote on whether they want another constitutional convention to rewrite the Missouri Constitution. Now, 1962, we voted to keep it. 82, we voted to keep it. 2002, we voted to keep it. And the next time we're going to vote is 2022. And, who knows? Again, this lecture is being given in 2019, so who knows what the future holds for 3 years from now, and who knows what a new Missouri Constitution would even look like. Now, with that being said, the United States Constitution starts off with a preamble. So does the Missouri Constitution. And this has this real weird phrase. It says, "We the people of Missouri," which actually echoes the U.S. Constitution, which says, "We the people of the United States." And it says, "with profound reverence for the supreme ruler of the universe." So that's the deity that the Missouri Constitution is kind of alluding to. It doesn't say God. I don't know why it doesn't say God, since it clearly means God. Instead, it says supreme ruler of the universe, which sounds like a Marvel character more than it does this guy. I don't know, maybe they're talking about this guy. I don't really know. But at the end of the day, it does have that real strange phrasing right there in the preamble. Now, the Missouri Constitution is pretty redundant, and it's pretty redundant in several places, especially early on in the Constitution. Why? For instance, the Missouri Constitution gives us freedom of speech. It gives us freedom of religion. It gives us due process and a day in court. The state can't just throw you in jail. But we already have these things, right, in the United States Constitution. So why does the Missouri Constitution feel compelled to include these things if we are already given them in the United States Constitution? Well, this is why. keep in mind, when the Missouri Constitution was first written in 1820, we did not yet know that the Bill of Rights would be incorporated from the U.S. Constitution to all of the states. We didn't know that because it was not made clear until the 14th Amendment that that would be the case. It's what we call incorporation theory. The 14th Amendment says that everything in the Bill of Rights, all these individual rights for citizens in the United States Constitution, will almost all apply to every single state. But the 14th Amendment hadn't been written yet, and it wouldn't be written for 48 more years. So when we originally wrote the Missouri Constitution, we included things like freedom of speech that were in the U.S. Constitution and that Missourians really liked, but we weren't sure if it applied to the state or not. So once again, these rights were included in the Missouri Constitution. It's not yet clear it would automatically be applied to Missouri. Now, in some cases, Missouri gives us the right to bear arms, but in ways that go above and beyond what the United States Constitution wrote. Like, this is the United States Constitution's Second Amendment. It says this is the entirety of the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. It says a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We'll talk about that Second Amendment later this semester. But this is the Second Amendment equivalent in the Missouri Constitution. It's so long, I can't even squeeze it all in there. And if you can't read it, don't feel bad. This is just an example you don't need to know. But it says the right of every citizen to keep and bear arms, ammunition, and accessories typical to the normal function of such arms in defense of his home, person, family, and property, or when lawfully summoned in aid of the civil power shall not be quit. So you see how it gets a lot more specific, includes a lot more stuff that the Second Amendment may have implied but didn't say out loud. But once again, cutting back to the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment gives us lots of stuff, but relative to this conversation, it gives us incorporation theory. Part of the 14th Amendment says, no state shall make or enforce any law which abridges the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. In other words, almost everything that's in here applies to here. That is what incorporation theory means. Almost anything in the United States Constitution applies to the Missouri Constitution. Now, once again, we didn't know at the time when we wrote the Missouri Constitution in 1820 that this was the case. It was implied in some places that the Constitution applied to state constitutions, but it was not yet known until the 14th Amendment made it explicit. So that is the reason why so much of the United States Constitution, so much of the Missouri Constitution seems redundant. Now, in addition to that, let's talk about how the Missouri Constitution sets up the structure of Missouri government. Because it sets it up in the same way that the United States government does. The United States government has a legislative branch, so does Missouri. The legislative branch at the federal level is called Congress, but Missouri's Congress, we call it the General Assembly for whatever reason. The U.S. government has the executive branch. Matter of fact, that's what Chapter 10 and Chapter 11 to a certain extent are about. We have a president and vice president, but not in Missouri. In Missouri, we do have an executive branch, but the governor is basically Missouri's president, and the lieutenant governor is basically Missouri's vice president. And we'll also read in Chapter 12 about the judicial branch. Now, the judicial branch is the Missouri. We'll talk about the Missouri plan later, but of course, the state of Missouri has its own court system, just like every other state does. And it actually has something really innovative involving our judicial branch, and we'll talk about that here towards the end. It's called the Missouri Plan, and you can just put a little whatever you call it, a bookmark in your brain, because we'll be coming back to that here in just a little bit. But first, let's work through each of these branches, starting with the legislative branch. Of course, that's the General Assembly. The General Assembly. Missouri's General Assembly is Missouri's Congress. And just like the United States Congress, Missouri's General Assembly is bicameral. Matter of fact, both of the chambers in Missouri both have the same name as their United States counterparts. We have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate. We'll talk about the Senate in a moment. But the United States House of Representatives splits up Missouri into 163 districts. So it too is huge, just like the United States House of Representatives is. Just like in the Missouri House, by the way, they're up for re-election every 2 years. So it's a bit of a crazy place. Pretty loud, pretty nuts. Everybody's constantly running for re-election. And you can compare that to the Missouri Senate. Now, the Missouri Senate has 34 districts, meaning we split up Missouri into 34 different sections of the state, and each section sends one representative. And what happens is, one half of these 34 districts are up for re-election every 2 years. The other half is up for re-election. The other two, so that means if you serve in the Senate, you are serving a 4-year term. So, let's start, once again, go through some factoids about the Missouri House, which, by the way, you don't need to know this. It's the 4th largest in the country at 163 seats, just in case you ever want to look smart at a party. To be in the Missouri House, the threshold is relatively low. You only need to be 24 years old, which, if you remember, is actually a year younger than being in the United States House. Now, you do need to be a qualified Missouri voter. You can't be some out-of-stater. You need to be a qualified Missouri voter for at least 2 years prior to the election, and you need to reside in your district, whatever that district may be, for at least 1 year before election. I don't exactly know what the standards for residency are, but you should at least know these standards going forward. Now, you can serve in the Missouri House for a maximum of 8 years. Now, there is no term limits in the United States House, but we do limit your terms in the Missouri House, and we limit you to 8 years max. So that means you can serve, because of math, that means you can serve for up to 4 years. 4 terms, I meant to say. You can serve 4 terms. Now, in the Missouri Senate, threshold's going to be a lot higher, and you got to be 30, which is a direct mirror of what it takes to be in the United States Senate. And you need to be a qualified Missouri voter for 3 years before the election. So you see the thresholds going up a little bit, right? Although the last one is the same. You do need to be a resident of your district, and you need to be a resident of your district for 1 year prior to election. Now, there are term limits in the Missouri Senate as well. And it's, once again, 8 years. Now, because these terms are 4 years each, that means you could serve a maximum of 4 terms, which means you can serve in the General Assembly for a maximum of 16 years. You could serve 8 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate, but then after that, you're out of time. So maybe you run for governor, maybe you run for U.S. representative, but you're not running for the Missouri General Assembly anymore. Now, we know what the legislative branch does, right? We know that the legislative branch makes laws. We know Congress makes laws, and in Missouri, it's the General Assembly that makes laws. However, it should be noted that these folks that you're looking at, the House and the Senate, they are not the only folks in Missouri with the ability to make law. Who out there is capable of making law in Missouri? We the people. We the people of Missouri have the ability to make laws without the House or Senate doing a darn thing. That is 100% true. Now, we have no ability to make laws in the United States government, but in the Missouri government, we can make laws. And we do it through something called initiatives. Now, initiatives are when we, the people, initiate a measure. In other words, we put some issue that we want to vote on the ballot directly. So if we say to ourselves, should Missouri be a right-to-work state or not? And we'll talk about that term later this semester. We will start a petition. We'll get enough people to sign that petition. And to get enough people, what that means is you got to get 5% of Missouri's population in 2/3 of its congressional districts if you want to propose a new law. It's called a proposition. Matter of fact, if you've ever voted, you might have voted on like a Proposition A or a Proposition B or a Proposition S. If you've ever voted on those things before, that's a proposed statute that the people themselves put together thanks to a petition. So if your petition is successful, it'll be added to the ballot, and then the people themselves will vote on it. Now, not only can the people themselves write a brand new law and then vote on it and adopt it without the General Assembly ever weighing in, we can actually change the Missouri Constitution. Of course, you have to raise the thresholds. Now you need 8% of 2/3 of Missouri's congressional districts. But if you get enough of those petitions and they're legal, you throw it in front of a court, whatever you want to vote on gets added to the ballot, and then there you go. The next time you vote, you could be voting on a Missouri Constitution amendment that the people themselves introduced. Some notable amendments that you don't need to know. I'm just going to trot through these real quick. All amendments that are added to the Constitution are not added on like in the United States Constitution, where just to add it on as additional amendments. Instead, what happens is they're shoved into Article 1, which is all amendments. Like the first amendment in Article 1 says that all power is vested and derived in the people. The 29th says that people have the right to organize and bargain collectively. So this talks about unions, and we'll talk about unions a little bit later. The 30th Amendment says that treason against the state can only consist in levying war against it or adhering to its enemies. I have no idea what that even means. How could you commit treason against the state of Missouri or adhere to who's Missouri's enemies? Kansas? I don't really know. What about the 33rd Amendment? 33rd Amendment says that marriage shall exist between only a man and a woman. Now, you may remember in 2014, the Supreme Court said that this is unconstitutional, that gay marriage is just as constitutional as straight marriage is. And so this amendment still sits there, though, like a ghost. It has no power, but it is, in fact, sitting there. 34th Amendment says English shall be the language of all official proceedings. So you get the idea. And even amendments were added this past year in November. In 2018, there were a number of amendments added, including what amendments were added? Something to reform gerrymandering in Missouri was added, for instance. And, a raise in the minimum wage was not an amendment, but it was a proposition that we voted on as well. Oh, an amendment that was added was legalization of medical marijuana. So that was put up by the people, voted on by the people. The General Assembly never lifted a finger, and thanks to the people in Missouri, it got done. So that's the legislative branch in Missouri. Let's take a little time to talk about the Missouri governor. The Missouri governor, you got to know this, folks. To be governor, you only need to be 30. So you don't need to be 35 like the United States president. But you do have to be 30, which is probably older than most of you right now. In addition to that, you got to be a citizen of the United States for at least 15 years. For whatever reason, we decided to add that. And then, of course, you need to be a resident of Missouri for at least 10 years, although it does not specify when in your life that 10 years needs to be. So you could be born in Missouri, live here till you're 11, I guess, and your folks move you out of town, and so move you out of the state, and then you can come back and run for governor, I guess. It's not clear to me that that means the last 10 years. As Missouri governor, you are up for election every 4 years, and you are term limited, just like the president, to 2 terms. Matter of fact, anytime you vote in the Missouri governor, you're voting in a presidential election, just like you're voting for president. Now, the Missouri governor is given specific responsibilities in the Missouri Constitution, starting with a role that he has in the United States Constitution. Maybe you remember this from the Constitution quiz, but in the United States Constitution, the Missouri governor, the governor of every state, is in charge of filling vacancies. If there's ever a vacancy in the United States House or the United States Senate, the Missouri governor is in charge of filling that seat. Sometimes the governor could fill it with himself or herself, which is kind of silly, but he can and she can do that if he or she feels like it. Missouri governor is also commander-in-chief of the state military forces. That's usually just, for sandbagging in the case of floods and stuff like that. Missouri is not marching off to war with anybody. The United States president is in charge of pardoning, and that's something we'll learn in Chapter 10. But the Missouri governor can grant pardons and reprieves as well, but he can only do it for state crimes. Just like the United States president can only do it for federal crimes. The Missouri governor cannot pardon you for a federal crime any more than the president of the United States cannot pardon you for a state crime. Just like the United States president, the Missouri governor can sign or veto bills, and the governor is required by law to submit a budget to the legislature within 30 days at the start of every session. But folks, I'll tell you right now, this doesn't happen. This is not something that really happens. The governor does do it. It submits a budget, but it just gets thrown in the trash can the second it arrives at the General Assembly. The General Assembly doesn't really care about what the governor wants to pass. Now, it's important to remember that we also have a lieutenant governor. He has to meet all the same qualifications as the Missouri governor does. He has the same 2 duties as the vice president does. And I say do you remember here, but we haven't actually talked about that yet. So don't worry about that. You don't need to know that at this time. He does serve on several commissions, however, which is something we do not ask the vice president to do necessarily. But the lieutenant governor has to constitutionally. Make sure you know who the current governor is. The current governor was actually the lieutenant governor. We had a governor that was elected in 2016, and Eric Greitens, but he had to step down in shame. He was about to be impeached and removed from office. Right now we have Governor Parsons. You should know Mike Parsons for your whatever quiz on the Missouri Constitution. In addition to that, now that we've talked about the legislative branch, now that we've talked about the executive branch, it's time to talk about the judicial branch. Missouri has a court system. And actually, when it comes to Missouri's court system, we do something that is pretty innovative that prior to us, no other state did. But once we started doing it, like 20 different states have adopted what we call the Missouri Plan. Now, the Missouri Plan focuses on how we select our judges. Something we'll be talking about very quickly, very soon in Chapter 12, is how judges are chosen at the federal level. Basically, the president picks them, and the Senate votes to confirm. You and I have no direct involvement in in judge selection on the federal level, even though we, the people, have to do what these judges tell us to do. So is that right? I don't know, to be honest with you. The alternative, is what some states do, where they have direct elections on judges. Now, that doesn't make a ton of sense either, because you and I don't know anything about the law. We don't know a good judge from a bad judge, aside from whether one has ever ruled in our favor or against us. So, and the states that do have direct elections of judges have judges running commercials for themselves, saying, "I'll be tough on crime." And that's just weird to have judges run commercials for themselves, right? So Missouri tries to chart a new path called the Missouri Plan. The people aren't just electing judges, but we do have a voice in the process. So let's walk through how exactly the Missouri Plan works. Well, first things first, you have yourself something called the Nonpartisan Judicial Commission, or NPJC, the Nonpartisan Judicial Commission. And it is staffed by this collection of people in the upper left-hand corner. You have the governor working with the current Missouri Chief Justice, working in tandem with the Missouri Bar, which is an association that represents Missouri's lawyers. And the 3 of these entities work together to staff the Nonpartisan Judicial Commission. And the Judicial Commission will be staffed primarily with people who are constitutional experts, or they're lawyers, or they're even past judges, people that really know the law really well. And they're nonpartisan, so they can't be chosen on behalf of their political affiliation, Democratic or Republican. Now, the NPJC is really fancy, but it really only has one job. And its job, anytime there's a vacancy in the Missouri court system, some judge has retired or even died, it is up to the NPJC to select 3 candidates to fill that position, that vacancy. So it'll choose 3 people that it thinks will be really, really good for being a judge in Missouri. And then the governor, that's kicking back to Governor Parsons there, the governor is in charge of picking the one he or she likes. In this case, I guess he says, "Hey, you, candidate A, I would like you to be the judge, please." It is also possible for the governor to reject all 3, in which case the NPJC would have to introduce 3 more. But whoever gets selected by the governor serves. They become a judge, but they only become a judge for 1 year. That's enough time for we Missourians to get a feel for what this person is like as a judge. Now, again, typically, Missourians don't know really anything about the law or anything about judges, but that's why there's all this quality control from the NPJC to the governor, from the Missouri Bar at the very beginning of this entire process. There's a lot of quality control, and usually judges get, unanimous recommendations from impartial bodies that recommend and don't recommend judges. So Missourians will then vote on this judge, whoever this judge happens to be, after a year. And then if voters vote yes, you get a 12-year term. It's a 12-year term, and judges can keep serving 12-year terms however long they want until they reach the age of 70. If you're older than 70, you can't run for re-election. Of course, if voters vote no, the NPJC goes back to work. So that right there is a crash course in the Missouri Constitution. Hopefully you found lots of information really interesting there, and best of luck on your quiz.